Portrait of a Chinese cricket. I'm holed up with a stranger in a mountain fasthold on the edge of the Beartooth Wilderness. The day after tomorrow is the spring equinox, and I will mark the timely anniversary of my birth at 2 minutes before noon. 40 years. This guy from the city of brotherly love arrived in Montana 2 days ago. We had agreed that he'd stay for a month. He's at work now up in the loft, and I'm down here drinking wild turkey, growing maudlin before the wood stove. This guy is an artist, a painter. He told me he had once been a protege of Andy Warhol. He said, I was one of the pretty boys playing in the factory. But that was long ago. We are middle-aged men now, aliens looking for love, brought together by an advertisement. In the morning, I'll tell him he has to leave. I'll celebrate my birthday alone, thank you. Just me and the dancing mouse and the Chinese cricket. I found this fellow through the ads in the New York Review of Books. Advertisements for personal people. Advertisements which are romantic and poetic. I read them all and try to imagine what these lonely hearts are really like. Most of the ads are from heteros, but there are a few from queers. And here's the advertisement which eventually led up to where I'm at now. Gay man seeks needle in haystack. Uncommon. 44, 6 feet 2, 185 pounds. Believer yet in the adventure of monogamy. Seeks uncommon older, younger, manly man. Active in life and play. Bookish. Lover of nature and culture. Solitude and intimacy. Who seeks to fill the mind's needs and the body's desires. I am an artist, a lover of the Maine woods and the Venetian canals. An uncommon kite seeks an uncommon anchor in the least likely of places. And that was exactly how it read. It took me 3 days to compose 4 lines of a response. Dear compatriot, I maintain an anchorage 'neath the northern lights. Your kite is welcome to fly here. I am lonely in Montana. Too many years with nobody to share my double bed. Come see me. Your friend, Buck. I suppose I was being seductive, but I wasn't really expecting a reply anyway. But in less than a week I got an answer. And then there was a whole flood of letters and hundreds of dollars worth of sighing telephone calls. And even a change in his last will and testament, which almost put the kibosh on the deal as far as I was concerned. He sent me color glossies of himself sitting amongst some fancy furniture in what he calls his atelier above his antique store in Philadelphia. Looking back now, I realize I should have been more wary. The kite, the uncommon kite, his name is Brian. Brian's very first letter back said, Buck, I'm going to come. I'm going to come. You sound very Whitman-esque. And in another letter, Brian tells me that when I make love to him, we will be connected right back to Oscar Wilde and Whitman. He wrote, see, I've made it with Allen Ginsberg, and he made it with Gore Vidal, and Gore Vidal made it with some old astrologer, President Chester Arthur's grandson, who once seduced Walt Whitman when Whitman was in his 70s and Whitman himself copped a handful of Oscar Wilde. It all sounded a little weird, but romantic, I suppose, at the same time. I probably should have made up some excuse and told him it wasn't such a good time to come, snow still on the ground at all. In his letters, the uncommon kite begins to sketch out our future. We'll spend our summers abroad, Scotland, where I can paint. I'll paint you. This guy doesn't even know what I look like, and already he's going to immortalize me or something. I finally got up nerve enough to send him a photograph. I sent the one which I thought showed me off best. It was just this black and white snapshot of me and Brute and Stan. Brute is Stan's dog, and Stan is my best buddy. Lives up in Livingston. Well, after Brian got the picture, he told me I was succulent looking. Well, I got the drift, but I still had to look up the exact definition. The kite writes, I'm going to sell my Jasper Johns, or maybe I'll unload one of Andy's Brillo pads. That will give us enough to live comfortably for a year or two. The kite says these are originals which those artists gave him when he was hanging around the factory back in the 70s. I knew about Warhol because I'd seen those Marilyn Monroe pictures once at a gallery up in Helena. 6 weeks into what Brian calls our courtship through the mail, he writes to say he's just seen his attorney. He's changing his will in my behalf. I call him up that very night after the rates went down. It was 1 o'clock in the morning back east, but this had me worried. I said to him, you're crazy, dude. I tell him, I'm a complete stranger to you. You can't just change your will like that. It doesn't make any sense. It sounds disbelievable. Listen, he confides, whispering over the phone. This is simply the ultimate gesture. Brian pronounces certain words as if they were all in capital letters. I got to thinking, what if I never make it to Montana? What if I get killed in an accident in the next few weeks, and we would never have managed to be in one another's presence, and you would be left eternally wondering if any of this, any of me, had been truly genuine, if I had truly cared. And then, suddenly, one day, you'd simply stop hearing from me. My phone is disconnected, your letters are returned, and you'd think I was just some crazy guy messing with your head. But then, a letter from my executor would come, informing you of your inheritance, and there it would be, the evidence. Evidence I had truly loved you. My loneliness, or was I starting to get interested in money, fell for this romantic hullabaloo. So what if he's crazy? Besides, nobody else had ever given me the rush treatment. It kind of goes to your head. So I start getting the cabin ready. It had been closed up all winter. Well, since our coffin building party. I lay in more firewood, turn on the power, haul in groceries, fill up the waterbed, swamp the place out as best I can. The plumbing in the shower is screwed up, and I call the plumbers. I buy flannel sheets without even noticing the tiny blue lambs leaping over white fences. Leave it to me to pick some little boy kind of bedding. I go over to the rental shed where my stuff is stored and toss some stuff in the pickup, just a few of my possessions to dress up the cabin a little. A blood-stained 46-star flag from about 1900. The life-size photograph of my grandparents on their honeymoon at Niagara Falls in 1896, my Graham's old mirror, a floor lamp, my hazelwood walking stick, the cribbage board I made out of an elk antler. Well, I even bought some pungent oil from the herb shop, and incense and candles. The girl behind the counter gave me the wink when she handed me the massage oil. I guess I wasn't an aging hippie for nothing. Yep, I confess. I'm into it now. Romance. It was March the 19th, the day he flew into Bozeman. I stood out on the tarmac behind the fence and watched the jet taxi and waved at faces I could barely make out. Considering the circumstances, I was pretty relaxed. I go back inside the terminal and wait, and I see him emerge from the jetway. He is not as smooth nor as young as his photographs, but not many of us are. He is tall and toothy, freckled, red hair. He's kind of gangly and gawky. I wave, but he doesn't seem to recognize me. I stride over and stick out my hand for a shake. He blushes. "Well, you must be Stanley," he says. "Where's Buck?" Instantly, I realize that when I sent him that snapshot, I hadn't actually told him which was me and which was Stan. Boy, that was dumb. "No, I'm Buck. I'm Buck." He looks me up and down, appraising. I'm short and stocky. Stanley's much taller, more lumberjacky looking. "Well, you are kind of a surprise." "Oh well, even if you're not succulent, I'll bet you're delicious." I get the feeling he thinks maybe I've misled him. Maybe his horns had gotten sharpened on the image of Stanley. Out in the pickup, I pull out a bottle of wine. "I got this to celebrate." But his nose actually wrinkles when he sees the label. Some gallows stuff at $6.85 a jug. He says we have to stop at a liquor store. We do, and he buys a whole case of wine. German, Italian, French, Portuguese. It's a lot of money, and I can't kick in. He puts it on his Visa. I've never even had a credit card. It's a balmy day, and on the way out of town he notices a graveyard and cries out, "Stop, stop!" We stop. We get out. He walks up and down the cemetery. He seems to be looking for a specific grave. He chooses to stop at one stone, takes a corkscrew from his inside pocket, and opens a bottle. And he proposes this toast: "To life and to death, to us and all our mistaken identities." I ask him, "What's so special about this grave?" "The birth date is the same as mine," he explains. "So at least I've outlived somebody." And then he just kind of grinned. We ride up over the pass to Livingston. A long freight is slowly snaking its way up the mountain. At the top of the pass, I stop and wait for the train to crest so I can wave at the engineer. I've waved at engineers since I was a little child, but for the first time in my life, the engineer does not wave back. He was looking right my way, too. They never wave, the kite gulps. We go down the pass to Livingston, and then down the East Side Highway through the Paradise Valley. The kite is very silent as we cut off the paved road and begin climbing up the last 4 miles of dirt and gravel. The property and the cabin are smack right up against the Beartooth wilderness. The kite seems uneasy at the gathering darkness and the narrow road. In the dusk, we pass through 3 small ranches, and I ask him to hop out to open and close the cattle gates. In the headlights, his eyes seem frightened. Once inside the cabin at Deep Creek, I finally tell him the plumbing's not yet working. "Yeah, the pipes froze over the winter. The plumbers are coming in the morning. No showers tonight." Brian pries open his crate. Inside is a gallon jar of homemade pesto. "I grew the basil right in my window box." And then he pulls out 10 pounds of Viennese roast coffee, his paints, his palette and brushes, a boom box, and 36 cassettes of music. Brian winks. "Music to love by," he says. I pan fry some meat and potatoes. He's a slow eater. Chews his food a lot. "This is tasty," he says. "Pungent. The meat's got a sweet taste to it." He looks at me with big eyes. Everything he says seems to be freighted. "It's roadkill," I explain. "Deer." "Roadkill?" "Yup. A buddy of mine ran into a deer down on the highway. He cut it up and gave me some. Brian put down his knife and fork. You didn't have to tell me that. Later, sitting by the wood stove, I am reading Young Men and Fire while Brian writes in his journal. Occasionally, in the window's reflection, I catch him studying me. He seems uneasy. Coyotes are calling out in the fields. What do we do next? A small, sudden movement catches my eye, and I glance across the room. A mouse is dancing. The mouse is inside the electric stove. The glass oven door serves as a kind of tiny stage for this dancing rodent. Yes, it is a winter-surviving mouse peering out at me. Upright on his back paws, he seems to be waving. This pleases me. I knew the mice were here somewhere. Last summer's rolled oats and pinto beans are still scattered all over the pantry shelves. I laugh out loud at the mouse and lift my arm in a wave. Brian glances up with a look of inquiry about my laughter, and I start to explain about the dancing mouse, but decide he might be alarmed at the notion of a mouse inside the oven. Oh, nothing much. It was just a memory tickling my fancy. He went back to his journal, and a not uncomfortable silence surrounded us, which is soon broken by a distinct, almost musical chirping sound. It would stop for a moment and then begin again. What's that noise? I do not really know, but I never like to leave a question unanswered. Like a quiz show contestant running out of time, I need to take a stab at the correct response. My whole future could depend on it. A Chinese cricket, I finally reply. Well, I had never heard of a Chinese cricket, but it seems reasonable that one exists somewhere. China? Brian is pleased with this answer. Oh, that's a very good omen. Happiness, yes. I'm pleased I made the effort to make up an answer. Maybe it really is a Chinese cricket. The inevitable moment of bedtime came, though we both stayed up till our eyes were closing. He changed clothes in the bathroom and came out dressed in the kind of pajamas you'd see in a Cary Grant movie. I stripped down to my frayed union suit and we clamber onto the waterbed. I'd been filling the mattress for 2 days, but the process was slow and the water beneath us, still not fully warmed, rolls back and forth, making silly little plopping noises. I reach out and touch his hand, and he responds with a quick pat on the back of my hand and then pulls away, rolls over with his back toward me, and I dream. I dream I am playing cards with a few farmers in a tiny village in the west of China. They caution me that the authorities in Beijing now know that a foreigner is traveling in the outlands without authorization, and a police detachment would soon be looking for me. I need to catch the train for Shanghai. I run to the depot. The station master is locking up. She points towards the southern plain where a thin wisp of engine smoke can still be seen. She explains that the train has just departed and there won't be another for 3 days. The plumbers come in the morning, a couple of good old boys from Livingston. I had the coffee going and they set quickly to work as they rap on about the local high school basketball tourney. They are, as most Montana folk are, amiable and unassuming. I play Jimmy Buffett tapes as they begin mucking the place out. They never catch a glimpse of the kite, the uncommon kite. He'd flown into the skylighted upper room and closed the door. Long before his arrival, he told me of his ironclad rule. He worked alone behind a locked door. It's just one of my idiosyncrasies. Whatever. I respect his need for privacy. The only awkwardness arose because the utility box containing the master switch for the pump is in the upper room, and the plumbers need to flip it off and on once in a while to see how their work is coming along. And I explain all this to the kite and tell him I'll have to be intruding. This did not please him, but he didn't have much choice if he was interested in taking a shower soon. But don't look at me when you come in, Brian instructed me. I'm a little embarrassed when I explained to the plumbers that I'd be the go-between for the pump switch. See, I got a buddy visiting from the east. I offer my best bemused shrug. He's working on this big project and needs some solitude. The plumbers keyed right in. Back east, huh? To them, that could explain anything. Last summer's liquefied detritus puddles up around the cabin floor as they do their work. And they'd call out, "Need the pump now." And I'd tap, tap, tap ever so cautiously on the upper door and then slide quietly in without looking over at Brian and his easel. I stand by the switch till the plumbers yell, "Okay!" I turn the pump power off and leave this monkish man to his painting. At lunchtime, I feed the guys some Polish sausage and chili and soda bread and coffee, and we knock off a round of three-handed cribbage. I could tell they were amused and curious about the unseen visitor. But I found his attitude stupid, inhospitable. He would have gotten a big kick out of talking to these guys. At least I thought he might. Get an inkling of how the other half lives. Well, finally the plumbers are successful. And before they go back down the mountain, we share a beer. And then the uncommon kite emerges from his sanctuary. And again, according to a custom he has forewarned me about, he requires more silence as he begins writing assiduously in his journal. The Chinese cricket chirps every 10 or 15 minutes, and Brian looks up with a half smile. And I spot my dancing mouse, who is again performing his routine inside the stove. He must have a little hidey hole which allows him to get in and out of the oven. "Why do you have that little cradle?" Brian asks. There's a little cradle over in the corner. And I tell him, "It came with the coffin. See that wooden box standing upright next to the cradle? It looks now like just some chest, but it's really a coffin." He gets up and examines the yin and the yang symbols carved into the coffin, and the symbols for male and female, and all our signatures, all the friends and chums who came out to help build the coffin on leap year's night. See, in Montana, you don't have to be embalmed and all that, and if it's private property, they can just bury me right out here in the meadow. It's close to sundown, and I ask Brian if he'd like to take a short hike up through the hills. We'll likely see some deer, an elk even, coyotes, maybe even a brown bear. But he begs off. The cabin is growing claustrophobic. Now that we are together, we have much less to say to one another than in our heated letters and frantic telephone conversations. Now that he is here, it's different. I walk out alone and climb up to where the pasturage meets the forest. This terrain holds most of what I have to share. Below, I can see the Yellowstone River snaking its way to the north and the east. The cattle are browsing in the fields nearby, nosing for grass through some patches of snow. I see an eagle in an old crag. On my return, I find Brian has prepared supper. He is whistling and seems more at ease. The Chinese cricket continues its occasional chirp. We sat down to our repast, candlelight, wine. He tells me about being naked in a Warhol movie. He tells me about sex in the subway. He asks if I believe in original sin. Afterward, I did the cleaning up. The remains of the roast chicken are still in the oven, and so is my dancing mouse. I lift up the tiny desiccated remains. The creature wasn't burned, but all the oxygen had been sucked out of its body. It was intact, but shriveled. My eyes are wet. Why didn't you run through your hidey hole? Why didn't you run through your hidey hole? I whisper to the mouse. Brian asks, what are you saying? I held out the dead mouse. It died in the oven while you were baking the chicken. I guess it was asleep when you turned the oven on. Well, he didn't have a chance to make a getaway. Why are you crying? Brian asks. I don't know. It waved to me last night. It was dancing. It had survived up here all winter. It would have had the whole summer to play. It's just a mouse. You're not blaming me, are you? It's just a mouse? What do you know about just a mouse? Oh, we're all here one day and gone the next. What's the big deal? He is laughing and I am PO'd. I take the mouse outside, scoop out a place to lay its body, cover it over with some small rocks. Hickory dickory dock, this mouse ran out its clock. Back inside, Brian has his boombox blasting. He has set up his easel. Would you model for me? I guess so. I never have. You mean naked? He nods his head. I throw some more logs in the stove. Nervously, I take off my clothes. He shows me where he wants me to stand. And then more silence as he works. 30 minutes. He puts his crayons away. I get dressed. Can I take a look? The uncommon kite shrugs his shoulders. I walk over to his sketch pad. I see a skull. I see my viscera. He has drawn an anatomical sketch, and I can see it is all me. Skinless me. I don't like it. It's frightening. I hate it. Don't be silly, Buck. Drawing a skull, the anatomy, is an artist's exercise, that's all. Did you think I was going to make you beautiful? Did you think I was just going to sketch your equipment? Don't be paranoid. I'm not going to kill you. He goes up the stairs and I can hear the waterbed gurgle as he climbs in. Why do I loathe this man? I want to punch him in the mouth. I want to split his tongue. I stay up drinking bourbon. I hear the Chinese cricket chirping. I fall asleep in the chair. I wake up when the moon lights up the room. I'm half drunk. The fire's almost out, and I feed it wood. I climb the stairs to the loft. I strip and climb in the sack. I put my mouth close to Brian's ear. Wake up. Wake up if you want to wrestle. It's what you came for, isn't it, wrestling? Brian is wide awake. He says, put the light on if you want to wrestle, as you call it. I like to wrestle with the lights on. I slide out of bed and stand up to flip the overhead switch. Now close your eyes, Brian says. Close your eyes. I'll tell you when you can open them. I hear the bedclothes moving. He is rustling around. Okay, Buck. I'm ready for you. I open my eyes and he is splayed out, face down on the bed. Sores cover his back. Ugly purple bumps run up his thighs. His bones stick out, almost like a cadaver. Doesn't that look good, Buck? You can wrestle with me anytime you like. No holds barred. I get dressed. He laughs. He laughs until he weeps, and he weeps until he screams. I slap him across the face. I nurse a shot of bourbon into his mouth. I wrap the blankets around him and I rock him till he falls asleep. And finally I go down the stairs and roll up on the couch in a sleeping bag. I awake at 9:30, brew coffee, tiptoe around so as not to disturb him. What a birthday! What a birthday. I want this guy out of here. I grow anxious when he's not up by 11. I climb the stairs. He's not in the bed. I put my coat on and go outside. I look up the meadows. I walk down to the creek. I call his name again and again. Brian! Brian! Something up in the sky catches my eye. It is a kite. A great black dragon looping through the air. And then I see Brian. He is running down the slope toward the cabin. He's holding the kite string. And the black dragon descends slowly onto the earth. Brian retrieves it and walks toward me. He hands me the kite. Happy birthday, Buck. Happy birthday, a black dragon. I make up some breakfast. I am quiet. He is quiet. I tell him finally, Brian, this isn't working out for us. You understand that, don't you? Brian doesn't respond. He just stares at me. Look, Brian, I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'm in way over my head. You need to leave. I'll help you pack up and we'll drive into Bozeman. There's always a seat on that afternoon flight to Denver, and you're sure to be able to catch a flight east from there. Brian finally replies, You think you can get off this easy? You invite me out here. You write me all these letters. He pulls the stack of my letters out of his case and waves them in my face. You tell me how lonesome you are, how much you want me to love you, how much you want to love me. Well, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving here, not ever. The Chinese cricket chirps. Look, Brian, I'm sorry you're sick. I'm sorry if I led you on. I didn't mean to. I really didn't mean to. I'm going to drive down to the Warren place and use the phone and see if there's a seat on that plane. It's the best thing, really. Brian glowers as I leave. And when I return, he is laying in the coffin, eyes closed, hands folded over his stomach. Then he opens his eyes and looks up at me. I wrote my own name on top of the coffin, Buck. I think I'll be the first one to use it. Good. It's yours. It's all yours. You can take it back to Philadelphia with you. There's a seat on the plane. I made you a reservation, but Brian simply reached up and pulled the lid closed. Stanley drives up a few minutes later. He climbs out of his truck. He is shouting, Happy birthday, Buckaroo! Hey, happy birthday! I walk outside and describe the situation. Stan goes in, opens the coffin, and speaks to Brian, but Brian keeps his mouth shut, never opens his eyes, not once. It was a struggle, but we loaded the coffin in the back of Stan's pickup. We gathered up the rest of Brian's belongings and drove to the airport. We carried the box to the Northwest ticket counter. I gave the agent Brian's ticket, and she made the change in the reservation. We checked his luggage. I opened the lid of the coffin and stuck the boarding pass in his hands. I'm really sorry, Brian. And then we left. We just left the coffin there with Brian still inside. We figured he finally would have to emerge. Stan drove me back to the cabin. He volunteered to stay for a while and do some birthday drinking and sorrowing, but I just want to be alone on the anniversary of my birth. The cabin is quiet now, except for the Chinese cricket, Brian's omen of good fortune, which again is chirping insistently. Now I want to find this cricket, perhaps tie it to a string and keep it with me forever. I track the sound to its source. The cricket was concealed inside a moldy, overstuffed chair which sat out on the front deck. I pick up the cushion. The cricket is nothing more than an exhausted, battery-operated smoke alarm. Well, it was Chinese after all. Right there on the bottom it said, Made in China. I curse and hurl the alarm up into the air. I watch it fall into the woods down by the creek. For a few days, I could still hear an occasional faint chirp, but it finally stopped. It was a little more than a year later when I got a letter and a large flat package from a lawyer in Philadelphia. The lawyer explained that Brian had wanted me to know he had been buried in the coffin, and that in exchange he had wanted me to have one of his paintings. Maybe he left me the Brillo pad, I thought. But it was a painting of me, not the anatomy one, but another, in which Brian had dressed me in a purple cloak. My face is resolute, my hair red gold, my eyeglasses are glinting, my smile is big, my arms are outstretched, palms up, and in my right finger perches a brown mouse. It is waving. In my left hand, I am holding a long blue string, which is attached to a magnificent orange cricket, which seems to be leading me along. Up above me in the sky is a golden dragon. I still have the painting. I've never had another love affair. I doubt I ever will. You have been listening to a story produced for television by McCarthy Coyle. This is Thursdays at 9. Good night.
Montana, 1985. Some days, I watch the Empire Builder swoon into the depot at Havre. It is heading east. Travelers rush off to purchase homemade sandwiches from a vendor. They buy newspapers, make collect calls. I chatted up with the jiving porters who lead their black lives in the ghettos of Chicago. And I speak with the big-bellied conductors who lead their white lives in the suburbs outside Chicago. I amble up to the engine, which is taking on fuel, and its rumbling noise sounds like diesel, diesel, diesel. The engineer is tall, red-bearded, contented in his eyes. He smiles quietly as we talk. Yep, I live right here in Havre. And make the run over to North Dakota, spend the night in Mandan, and then bring the westbound Amtrak back over. I like him. I want to go with him. I want to hold the throttle and pull the whistle, wave to little children. But when I run out of logical questions, I shyly bid him goodbye. I stand there and wave as he lays on the power, and the 14 cars gather momentum toward the east. He winks when I wave. A few minutes more and the train has disappeared. The depot is quickly deserted, only to reassert itself in the late afternoon when the westbound arrives. I drive east on Highway 2, Fort Belknap, Malta, Glasgow. I gaze at Fort Peck Dam and then continue east to the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers, where the green water merges with the brown. I cross the line into North Dakota and visit the graves at Fort Union. 100-year-old wood markers inscribed with mortal explanations. Died in childbirth, drowned, murdered by robber, diphtheria, kicked by horse, suicide, hanged for rape, beaten to death by father. I lay my sleeping bag down amidst the graves and wonder why we no longer write down similar explanations on 20th century gravestones. I awake at dawn and jig to the west and then cut north. Beyond Scobie, I cross the border into Saskatchewan, where I discover a little prairie village, Coronach, celebrating its centennial. And I share their picnic food and add my tenor to their prairie hymns before heading back south. I recross the border, leave the paved roads and drive the gravel. Through Four Buttes, Peerless, Luster, watching the combines harvesting the wheat. I reach a railroad crossing on the rolling prairie and observe a long grain freight pulling onto a siding. The sun is beginning to settle down. I park the car and walk over to talk to the brakeman. Yes, he explains, they've pulled off the main track to allow the westbound Empire Builder to pass through. The passenger train is 5 hours late, and it won't be crossing here for another 40 minutes. I start to drive on when I remember that my new friend, the engineer, will be piloting this one on his way back from Mandan. So I take out cheese and sardines and bread and a bottle of beer and an apple and settle down on my traveling quilt. To eat, to wait. The prairie sky is dusking down. Western streamers of orange and red and rose and purple are pulling down the drapes. I am laying on my quilt. My eyelids are closed, but I am gazing through them, watching skeins of light, and suddenly there is a wild pattern striking my eyeballs. I open my eyes to see the northern lights ablaze, the closest, the wildest I've ever seen. The colors rip and tear around the sky like neons in a heavenly jukebox. Reds leap into the stratosphere, greens plunge toward the earth. Golds and mauves and violets cavort up and down the horizon. I want to be picked up, seized by this celestial display. I want to be assumed bodily into this holy carnival of color. I even imagine I'd seen an angel, one of the seraphim. And in my joy, I am impelled to be naked. I strip off all my clothing. And now, underneath me, the earth is beginning to vibrate, and the tracks begin to emit tiny pings. The Empire Builder is heading my way. In the distance, I see its giant eye, careening its illuminating gaze from one side to the other. The train seems to take a very long time to reach me, but when it does, it's balling the jack, taking advantage of the long, straight, flat stretch of track. I begin leaping up and down as it approaches. My arms are waving in a semaphore signal. He will, I hope, be attentive to the track, be resting his arm out the window of the engine, peering ahead. There will only be a fleeting instant for any recognition. And then the train is upon me, and then it is gone. But I have seen his face, yes, peering up into the heavens, taking in the aurora borealis. Yet, just for a split second, I believe he has seen me, recognized me, knows me now for who I am and what I am. And then he is gone. The train has disappeared. The northern lights are fading. The freight train is sidling back onto the main track, and I am laughing. Naked behind the wheel, I laugh and sing all the way back to Havre. Perhaps a week later, I am again at the depot. I walk up, somewhat embarrassed, and greet the red-bearded engineer. "Hey, did you see me? Did you see me the night of the Northern Lights?" "Sure I seen you," he replied. "How could I miss? You and all your newborn glory, jumping up and down. Well, that light show must have put mustard in your vitals." He winked, poked me in the ribs, and climbed up into the cab. Leaning out his window, he called out, "You know, you're nothing but a FRN. FRN, yup, a friggin' railroad nut is what you are. Maybe I'll see you around town." And then he headed out again for North Dakota. Occasionally, I'd run into him at the VFW club, and we'd play a game of cribbage at the bar. He'd ask me about my life, where I was headed, and why. He took me fishing a few times, and once he confided in me, about God, about his childless wife, about the fact that he was the one who was barren. All too quickly, I was transferred out of Havre. One evening, just before my departure, I saw him dancing with his wife at the Vets Club. He waved at me as they two-stepped around the floor. Later, he came over to the bar, bought me a beer. He pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket. He said, "Listen, I know you're leaving soon. I'm a settled man. Things are settled, and it's easier, less dangerous somehow. You..." He swallowed his Adam's apple and then continued, "There are choices. I just want you to understand." He shook my hand with the two of his, passed me that folded square of paper, and then he returned to his table where his wife sat, looking very alone and uncertain. Back in my apartment, I read his handwritten elegy, which he calls "On Thinking of a Friend." A green surf pounds the dusty beach behind my house. It comes from the mountains, tossing whiskered breakers against my barbed wire shore. Blackbirds rise up and add their calls to the sound that dodges past my arms and surges on with the gait of an uneven wheel. I turn my head to see its trail of scattered leaves, trees jerking like just roped calves, and know it is flowing down the hill in search of his open window, where it will pulse in with the movements of a lover, as he, a long way from water, casts himself adrift upon a private sea. The morning I finally departed, I was driving fast, west on Highway 2. A boy was walking with his dog in the borrow pit, and the animal suddenly dashed up onto the road. I felt a thump and pulled over. The injured shepherd was already pulling itself toward a trailer home a few hundred yards away, and the boy was running after his pet, crying out, "Sweetie, sweetie!" When I caught up with them, the boy's father already had his gun ready, and his son, a skinny kid with black and blue marks on his arm, was pleading with the man not to destroy his favorite companion. I could see the shadow of a woman looking out from behind the screen door, hiding. "Well, it looks like just a broken leg," I tell the man. "I could make it a splint, then it should heal up in a month or so." "Oh yes, please, Pa. The man can fix Sweetie up. Please." "All right, now quit the whimpering and get in the house right now." The father was grim-faced, and he turned a sharpened smile toward me and said, "Hey, we lose at least 3 dogs a year on this stretch. There's always another litter. Not worth worrying about this one." He grinned when the gun went off. The boy was screaming. I returned to my car. I drove slowly past the trailer house. The man was out in the back, tossing the dead dog onto a refuse heap. And then I saw the boy running through the fields, waving at me. I stopped the car. "Please, mister, can you take me with you? I won't be any trouble. Maybe I'll just get out in Great Falls." "Well, you can't take off from home. Your folks will miss you, fella." "No way. He'll miss beating me is all." I looked back toward the trailer. The man is looking our way. He has the gun. He's gripping the woman by the wrist. The boy does not belong to me. Where would we go? What would we do? "Sorry, buddy. I just can't take you along." And again, I'm driving down the highway, crying now, wondering where I'm going, wondering when my courage for love had abandoned me. When I got into Great Falls, I called my friend, the railroad man, told him what had happened. He said, "I think I know who that family is. I'll keep a look-see for that kid. Don't worry, I'll do it." And that's all that happened. I don't know what else to say. I've never been back. Giving up the goose. We stood up for the goose a few months ago. Yes, the groomsmen gave him away. His stalwarts, Dan and Jim and Charlie and myself, came east from the Rockies to witness and bless this new partnership. Goose calls his nuptials the streamline to sweetness. It was easy business for none of us. During their 2-year courtship, we each had private correspondence and late-night calls from the goose as he sounds us out on the wisdom of marriage. "She doesn't understand how important you all are to me," he explained, "and she gets ticked when I tell her I'll always love Vicky. But how can anyone excise love? Well, if you can, I could shuck her one day too, right?" Unwilling to share my own intimacies with a woman I've never met, I began sending my letters to his office. Charlie, Jim, and Dan, with 37 wedding anniversaries behind them, no longer see marriage as any streamline to sweetness. We want Goose to reap the joys he expects from marriage, but at the same time, we want to keep his purity of spirit for ourselves alone. He gives us each joy, and we fear his diminution in our own lives. He is ours, belongs to our band, and there is a muted melancholy amongst us. We do not wish to surrender him over to another, a woman. And yet my compatriots, already linked to the other gender, are more sanguine than I. And of all the men I know, Goose is surely the one who has transcended all this women's as aliens business. I watch him now in a quiet moment as he gently touches her wrist, like a doctor counting the heart's pulse, his eyes never wandering from hers, his ears seeming to grow larger as they take in her words. And I realize he has a special grace, allowing him to treat the hearts of men and women alike. He has enveloped me in just the same way, taken my confessions, assuaged my griefs, and yet now somehow a contract, a ritual, will place her a rank higher. Am I envious of the bride? Perhaps. After all, none but Goose has loved me better. We have shared a winter's quilt, and glad for the warmth, danced the two-step in country bars, raced the empire builder, highballing across the plains, cooked and savored roadkill, canoed the Smith, drank wild turkey, and chanted at Jerry Johnson's hot springs. I think it is that the Goose and I will never again team up for the cruise through the big open and sardine and cheese sandwiches consumed on the Missouri's banks. No more striding through the fields to encounter an old Indian in an abandoned church. No, I do not wish to attend these nuptials, not this time. I had been giving away my own best men, each forged, none accidental, for 2 decades, and this year I feel broken a little by time, unrequited, an outlander to couple them. Always before I had come to witness these weddings with great faith in romance and conjugal union. Then too, I'd always wanted to till a garden without rocks. Today, I wonder if I any longer understand the potential goodness of union, and it is difficult for me to percolate with the bonhomie expected of the groomsmen. My heart is constricted. Still, it would be cruel not to appear. How unlaunched the Goose would feel. And so we stout hearts come. It is wedding eve, and the men are up late, varnishing the joists of our friendship. I rarely blush, but do now when Jim reminds Goose, well, if you could put up with Max kvetching and moaning all these years, you're about as ready for marriage as anybody. Goose roars and runs at me, hoists me high in the air, and planting a kiss on my face, shouts, "Hey, I love this geek." And now Goose, his tenor cracking, tries to teach us the Jacques Brel song, "If We Only Have Love," which he wants the men to sing at the ceremony. But we are hopelessly off-key and agree not to embarrass the bride a cappella. The doorless Studebaker in the jailhouse story is being spun, but I am in reverie. I see us last summer at the ranch when he brought back this coastal woman for the first time and told me and the folks his news. That day, he and I were alone down in the barn, separating my cobwebs from his. We once built a coffin for whomever needed it first on a leap year's night, and now we are sifting through its contents. Clippings from the borrowed Times, the populist rag we published slide through our fingers, old long johns wrapped around icons from the Goose's journey to Jesus, a trip he never mocks, though it is over now. Pottery, Afghans, maps, and then we cheer when we find the treasure, his golden braid lopped off years ago. We laugh and sing, "Abbot, abbot, 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 abbot," said the monkey to the chimp. The rehearsal is no grimmer than any other. An aunt who seems to appear at weddings all across America is there, with her clipboard and a formidable knowledge of nuptial etiquette. She advises on proper sequence, deportment, aisle speed. When she isn't looking, we pull faces, make rabbit ears behind Goose, and switch the positions she decreed. She eyes us warily as we whisper our plan to march out of the church side by side and arm in arm rather than the single file she is insisting on. Our rebunctious small boy behavior is the levee,
holding in our immense reservoir of emotion. We are four men who, by grace and will and wit, are linked in love with the goose. And here in this Methodist church, we camouflage the passion and grip of our affection so that the onlookers are at ease in chalking us up as just good old boys being unruly. Wedding morning, back at the house, Goose has his clothing options laid out, and we must dress him up. He has vowed to wear a snap-buttoned Western shirt and the Levi's that have been his customary attire since days of yore. But Goose yields to the bride's day, and so he dons his inside-the-beltway blue suit, white shirt, collar riding his Adam's apple, and a pale gray tie that I fashion into a Windsor knot. Goose calls it the hated yoke, an emblem of male devotion to hidebound notions about almost anything. On the ride to the church, Goose worries if the tie doesn't exude too much paleness, which he believes may be unbecoming to his raw-boned complexion and red hair. And we chortle, too late to worry about exuding paleness. Goose, you're cooked. The minister stands sentry with us in the sacristy. He makes small talk. You all married? Dan, Chim, and Charlie affirm their status and their offspring. How about you, Mac? He drawls. You ever been corralled? I gently mock his accent. No, preacher. I've been rodeoed a few times, but I ain't never been corralled. And we laugh so hard we must put our hands over our mouths so the sound comes out. Goose peers nervously out into the church, the organ intones, and like actors we sweep our hands across our faces to restore a semblance of dignity. Goose weeps and smiles through the ceremony, overcome with joy and the enormousness of this undertaking. He is 37, a little tardy for a first-timer. We behave ourselves, and it is over quickly enough. Charlie was tottering for a moment, Jim blushing, Dan and I heaving great sighs. The pictures show us looking very grave, and we seem to be bracing one another up. Outside the church, Goose motions me over to where he and his bride are standing alone. He hovers between us like the referee in a mock boxing match of lovers, holding each of us by the arm as we clinch together. He looks from his new wife to his older compadre and gently tells us the rules. Now we're all in this together, and you've each got one another, Goose explained. Perhaps this is the wedding I have come for. She and I look shyly at one another. The Goose has said, we will share as best we can. I will. I do.